Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey, Bill, how you doing today?
Angela, I've just never been this happy. How about yourself?
Well, I'm tippy-tappy. So, Bill, we have another guest that came to us from the time that we spent at a conference, and we've talked a lot about conference attendees and networking and how to maintain relationships with those folks. And one of those people that you and I met last October at the M conference through Manager Tools is with us today. His name is Andrew Hall, and Andrew is the department head of financial management within the LA County Sanitation District. Andrew's career has been varied, starting out as a civil engineer before transitioning to financial planning and analysis. What a shift. Andrew holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and environmental engineering and a master's degree in environmental engineering, as well as multiple certifications. Clearly, Andrew, education has been an important part of your professional and career development. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your guys' time and the service you guys are doing by offering this podcast.
You bet. Well, let's get started by telling us a little bit more about that career trajectory.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I always loved solving problems as a kid. I was a Lego player. I'd take stuff apart, wanted to put it back together. And when I was a junior in high school, the state college where I was living in Utah did a engineering state where you get to go and see all kinds of engineering. So had the opportunity to go up there, try a bunch of kinds of engineering, was doing a environmental engineering plan and program in there. And I really enjoy what they had. And they said, hey, we have 7 graduating seniors. They got 14 job offers. And I said, that's the career for me. That sounds fantastic. So I went through that in college. As I got further along, realized that a lot of folks are looking for master's degrees in that space. And so decided to do a master's degree with a professor. And as I was coming out of that master's program, I had to look for a job with a company that funded my master's degree. And so found about sanitation districts here in California. I thought, oh, great, I'll live there for a few years and then sure, we'll move back to Utah with family. Came out. I've been here ever since. It's been phenomenal. Started with some regulatory reporting and compliance, did some stuff in operations. And within all that, because I like to solve problems, got involved in some financial reporting and different things. We went through a new ERP system, learned about that. And so we had a joint financial engineering role come open. And I said, hey, I'm interested. I'll get into it. So transitioned to that, learned all about financial reporting and analysis, all of our rate setting, revenue collection, all kinds of different things. And while it wasn't engineering, it was still solving problems, which is what I loved. So it was a great opportunity and continued to move up to where I am today.
Well, so it's kind of cool to have that conversation about you get a degree in something and then your life takes you on a slightly different path, but still lets you do stuff that you love to do. And so actually there's some real great teaching moments in that conversation all by itself. But what occurred to me as you're discussing that is that there probably, as you're moving into different fields that weren't part of your education, there probably were opportunities where you said, well, I'm going to have to do a lot of learning about how it works over here. And since this is a mentoring podcast, I'm betting there was some mentoring experience that came along with that, where you were seeking out people who knew something that you didn't know going into this new field. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience in mentoring as you got started?
Absolutely. So I think there were 2 things that were really, foundational in mentoring when I started. The first one is when I first started, it just so happened my supervisor was super busy. He was doing a really important project, so he pretty much had no time for me. But one of the other senior engineers in our group kind of took me and a bunch of other newer engineers under his wing and taught us the ropes, showed us how to do things, showed us the culture of the agency, taught us to write how the agency wants us to write. And so I'm deeply indebted to him. His name's Frank, and just did a phenomenal job at helping me to understand what it meant to be successful at the organization. And on top of that, the unit I was in happened to have a steering committee that decided, hey, we needed a mentoring program here. So they put a mentoring program in place. They paired all of our new engineers up with people that were more experienced. And I was connected with another engineer at the agency, but in a very different focus area than I was in. So I was on environmental civil side. He was structural, which is very different here in California. You got to make sure you're seismically protected. You have all those kind of expertise. So it really didn't match from a career type perspective. I didn't want to do structural engineering. He didn't want to do wastewater treatment. But what he came with was all the other outside tidbits. He'd been in consulting for a while. He'd been in other agencies. He'd done a lot of leadership stuff. And so he brought those things into our mentoring relationship, which wasn't really what the program was designed as, but he found something that worked. And I really am indebted to him for taking the time and effort to put that together for me. And I think part of that, getting those connections in different places and some other bosses I had, they were really encouraging of you getting to know people in different areas. You know, the same reason I've stayed in contact with you guys since we've had the M conference we went to. It's all about networking and being connected to people. And I definitely did that in my career. So while I wasn't in finance, I knew people that were in finance. I got involved in the Toastmasters club that was at our agency when that first started, and got to meet people in all different spans of our organization. And then you had someone to go to when you had a question. Hey, I don't understand. What is a chart of accounts even? I had no clue what that was when I first started, right? But then you had somebody that was a resource that you'd already developed some relationship with, had some connection with. And I think it's taken in all kinds of different directions from there, not only at the agency, but people we've connected with through conferences like you guys and many others that just have a different viewpoint on life.
I'm curious about that a little bit more, Andrew, because it sounds like you had kind of a role, right? Your role was in water management side of it. And yet you had this interest in learning more about the business side of the house, the financial side of the house, and so on. What inside of you, I'm just curious, prompted that?
Well, I don't know if it was a happenstance is probably the best way to describe it. So when I first started, we had our whole financial system was on a mainframe. And it was in a 1970s mainframe. After my master's degree, we're in the early 2000s. So it was well past its prime. And so people were teaching us how to use it, how to get things through. But we just started using data and other types of stuff. And I was interested in technology. And so I guess they asked 3 or 4 different people if they wanted to do our technology stuff. And they said no. And my boss came and told me I was going to do it. So I got involved.
You were voluntold. Okay.
I was voluntold for sure. And so when I did some transitioning and things, there was a spot that came up in a group I was really interested in. And my leverage to get into that spot was this IT technical stuff that I could do. And as soon as I got down there, they said, hey, we're putting together some financial reports to make sure our plants are running effectively and we're being cost effective. And they said, hey, we need you to put reports together for that. So they were hand doing all these financial reports for all of our things. I put it in a system, automated it. And as soon as I did that, they said, oh, well, when we're doing the new system, you have to go make sure that these all work still. So that was how I kind of got thrust into it. That's really more happenstance, but again, just trying to be there to solve problems, and right place, right time, I think is definitely a benefit for everybody. But sometimes you find those opportunities if you're looking for them.
Well, not being afraid to ask questions and just coming with a curiosity, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but as always, the reward for doing good work is more work. So
For sure. For
by
sure.
solving problems, good. You're here to stay because you're going to keep on solving problems for us.
Exactly. That's a big benefit for anybody.
So earlier in the conversation, you sort of passed by pretty quickly, and I actually wanted to anchor a little bit on the conversation. You had a mentoring program, and then the guy that was mentoring you said, "Well, we're gonna make some changes on that. We're gonna do something that works better." Could you talk about what it was and what he changed to, and why that you think that was beneficial? And just so you know, the point is there are plenty of formal mentoring programs out there, and I think it's actually really valuable for the mentor and mentee to be able to say, let's do the things that are going to work for us in this mentoring relationship. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
Well, I wish my memory is perfect on everything, but I will say what I recall of the program at the time, it was very structured in like, hey, you're going to do these 5 or 6 things as a mentor. Mentees, you're supposed to be asking specific questions. I'd only been working at the agency for a couple of months. I didn't know what questions to ask. And I think that's a big challenge, especially with new employees, new people earlier into their career. You don't know what to ask. So how can you make this as effective? So he took that opportunity to say, hey, when I was in this spot, these are things that I think would be valuable. And I think he also took the time, our first meeting or two, while he had a couple things to talk about, was him getting to know a little bit more about me and my background, and him sharing a little more of his background. And both of us could see where he would see where I would light up on things that were interesting, or we'd have more of a conversation. And then he'd come prepared the next time to say, let's have some discussions on that. And it ended up being a little more of a like information sharing than anything else. It wasn't like I'm skill developing. It was more like, hey, here's some things to think about. If you ever become a supervisor in the future, you may want to know these kind of things. If you ever want to work in consulting, here's some things you may want to know. Here's some interesting books or reading materials that I've had you might want to be interested in. So it was more facilitating that learning that I think is really valuable. And I've seen as I've transitioned, we stopped doing that mentoring program for a while, but we did come back and we have a mentoring program again. And the first mentoring that we did, I was now the mentor, mentoring a new employee. And that was part of our conversation, having what are the challenges you're seeing at work? Where are these kind of things? But that one had a little more homework where it was like, hey, you're having an issue. Hers happened to be she had 1,000 things that she was doing because similar, she that did good work, and so she kept getting more work. So
Right.
what do you have to do? You have to figure out how to do that. So I pointed her out to Getting Things Done, who you guys might be familiar with. I'm a big fan of David Allen's work in that arena.
Yeah.
So explained that to her and how that might work and how that context would do. And then we had multiple meetings again off after that of helping her refine her system and make it more effective. And I think originally she had been planning to potentially transfer to go somewhere else because the workload was just so overwhelming, although she loved it. But after the fact, really recognized, hey, no, I can handle this workload. I really enjoy it. I'll stick around for a little while longer. So just a great opportunity to kind of, again, have that connection, see what works and where those interests are. And it probably changes as you're a mentee or a mentor, depending on where you are in your career or what you're trying to get into. You may not know the questions to ask, but definitely a big benefit to have a mentor who's open to diving into those areas with you.
How does your organization determine who's going to mentor whom?
So today it's a little different. It used to be that was just for those in our professional unit at the time when we first started. Today we have a formal program for the whole agency, and in that program, the mentors or people who are interested in mentoring people, they put a little bit about themselves and where they feel like they have strengths. The mentees put in where they're interested in, and my understanding is for the mentee, you get paired with people, some options to pick, and then they can reach out, explain these are the things that I'm kind of interested in. Would you be willing to be my mentor? And so I've had a couple that have gone through this program. We've done it for a little over a year now, and it's like a 6 month tranche to finish up with the person. And then if you want to transition on, you obviously can transition, or if you want to continue a relationship, you're welcome to outside of that program.
When your organization had that break where it was formal mentoring and then you said stop for a while and now it's restarted again. Um, Bill and I, as you're aware, Andrew, we're big fans of informal mentoring as well. So I'm curious, what did that look like as both you as a mentor and I'm sure as a mentee in both instances?
For sure. So I think yeah, we when that process stopped was really during the 2008 financial crisis, and we went through a
Oh,
hiring freeze. So that
Right.
was the reason they stopped the program. They said, well, mentoring is really for those new employees who come in. We're not hiring any new employees. We don't need to do a program anymore. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside. We were about 5 years without hiring anybody, at least in the professional ranks. So I think that's what really kind of took it down from where it was. And there'd always been a desire to add it back in the future. Just wasn't something that ended up happening. But I think it ended up really being more on individuals. And again, I'll speak to my first mentor at the agency, Frank Guerrero, that I worked with. He was really good at pointing out who to be connected to, who to ask questions to, why to be connected to people, how they were useful to you, how you would be able to have conversations and be useful back to them as well. And so he just kind of got in my mind a culture of let's have conversations with people and let's be connected so that you can find information, knowledge, share things outside of work. We had some soccer games we played outside of work. That was great. So finding just different relationships you could develop and how to just be connected. That was a big part of what he shared with me. So I think that really is where it became for me, is like, who could you be connected with? What different things could you do? And I think finding space to do things that haven't been done before. So we definitely had the opportunity to join like the Toastmasters Club I mentioned earlier, which gets you connected to people you weren't connected to before, or in different options. Say you're doing that expense report and you've never talked with the people over in accounting, gives you an opportunity to go talk to them. Hey, I'm trying to understand how this works, help them understand where things are. So I think that's a big part of it. That being said, one of the challenges I feel like I had at my work, we were definitely a culture of people got promoted by doing projects, not necessarily for mentoring people or developing staff. It was if you did a big project, you got promoted back when I first started. And so there really wasn't that desire, I don't think, by our upper management at the time to mentor others in how they came up. So, like as I became a supervisor, I had no one to tell me what I should do or how I should do it. It was more just, hey, if you have questions, come talk to me, but just figure it out on your own. And because of a good friend in my community, I found getting things done. Because of found getting things done, I found manager tools, and that became the foundation for how I was able to become a supervisor and start leading my own staff. I shared that with other people. So I think part of what I've learned in this mentoring is it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal program with someone. It doesn't have to be even with an individual. Podcasts like this, people hopefully listen to them. That is a form of mentoring. You are getting mentored, even though there isn't necessarily that same conversation back and forth. Books, great opportunity to go read. Other educational opportunities can be found as a form of mentoring. And I think all too often we don't recognize it as such, and we don't get the benefits because of that. But if we're always trying to learn or trying to find ways to take something on that I haven't done before or see different viewpoints, I think there's a lot of value in having that mindset and being able to really connect with all those different opportunities that are around you. Because honestly, I think mentoring is just one of many forms of learning that you can use to help develop yourself.
Well, so the other part that sort of jumps out at me as you're talking about this is the contrast between what you just described as your view of mentoring and the fact that it seems to sort of go on all the time and there are opportunities for it all the time. But the program was designed only for junior employees, the formalized program that you discussed. But we don't have any more junior employees because of the hiring freeze, so we don't need mentoring anymore. That seems an odd way to approach mentoring to me.
I
Uh,
think it was. I think that's the reason why we're not doing it that way today.
right. And it's like man, if I ever heard a need for mentoring, it's when there's all sorts of upheaval all around us and we don't have any new people. And so if we're stuck with whoever we have right now because there's a hiring freeze, how are we going to get those people to grow into the new positions and grow in their set of responsibilities and learn if we stop mentoring because there's a hiring freeze on? It seems very counterintuitive to me.
Oh,
But
totally.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you bringing up the fact that you can get mentoring from lots and lots of places. And so, any kind of future mentoring program, if it was up to you, how would you sort of structure that? I mean, I very much like your conversation about the fact that you guys, you and I'm sorry, the gentleman, your favorite first
Frank.
mentor, Frank,
Frank.
sat and talked first and said, let's look at each other and see what lights each other up, was the way you put it, I believe, which is, that sort of makes the connection about, is this a good mentoring relationship or not? Because if you found somebody, in that formalized program and nothing seems to light the two of you up on the same topic, maybe that's not your best mentor. So, okay. So now, Andrew, you're going to set up the next mentoring version. What's that look like?
Well, it's interesting because literally the person who was sitting across from me was a brand new employee at the same time as I was, and that is who they got. It's the person that they had nothing in common, and it was such a painful 6 months.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
I do appreciate the way that we're organized today of like ability to learn what the potential mentors are interested in and what you're interested in. But I do think there's a big space for supervisors, managers, even higher up executives to be more mindful in how they're thinking about mentoring. We've recently hired a couple of new people at our agency, and one of those new people works directly for me in a position that we've never had before. people at our agency work there a long time. Our average retiree is typically 62, and they've worked for our agency somewhere between 26 and 30 years. They are lifelong employees at our agency.
Right.
So when you come in, like this individual is, at a position that's a higher position, and she has 10, 15, 20 years experience outside of our agency, it's a different experience coming in. So specifically, rather than have her just come and talk to me, I identified a mentor that has recently come from the outside. I said, hey, I want you to have this conversation. So I think there's some space for us as leaders and executives and supervisors and managers to find someone outside of that space to try to start getting them connected. I think there's a big spot in that. And I also think that um, while a formal mentoring program is really important to be able to get some of those connections, I think you need to do that and more, right? Of finding ways for them to get connected in other ways, whether that's encouraging them to do a Toastmasters group. We have groups because of what we do. We do give tours and other speaking opportunities to our staff as educational people come in, maybe the schools or what groups want to come in and take a look at what we do. We give that opportunity to all of our employees to be able to be on what we call our speakers bureau or to be part of our tour guides. And so having them be able to do that gives them an ability to connect with people they wouldn't normally through their day-to-day work. And I think those connections are really key in doing it. So I think, yeah, it's a little bit of both of having the formal program like we have today, where it gives them opportunity to say, I'm interested in something, let's find a mentor that matches. But also, hopefully, as supervisors and leaders, we're taking the time to say, where do I see my people needing to grow, and helping them to identify mentors.
Sounds like your organization has shifted a little bit from, owning a big project as not being the only
For sure.
path to promotion. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
and so as you've gone up more senior in the organization, there's less people above you to be your mentors, right? I'm curious, how do you find your mentors today?
It's definitely been more challenging, right? And I think that's where I talked a little bit before about finding things outside of that space. So I've been a big fan of manager tools. I mentioned it before. I know you guys are as well. They have a series of podcasts about networking and building a network. And I think that's a big key, is how are you connecting with people outside of your organization if you don't feel like that's in your organization? Because I haven't always felt like the people that are interested in what I'm interested in or how I want to grow are necessarily here at the agency. So how am I getting connected externally, and how do I do that? I think that's been a big benefit. Part of that's been working with internally with people to get assigned to work with other agencies and similar agencies, be able to connect with them. But also, it's what am I interested in? Can I find a podcast? Can I find a book that's like that? And then reach out to people. So I know, like, Angela was sitting next to me at the table at the M conference. You guys mentioned you were doing a podcast. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I started looking into it, and had an informal situation turn into a more formal situation with my CEO recently. And so I went and looked at your guys' podcast and said, okay, I want to be really prepared for this mentoring situation. One of your podcasts is how do you prepare as a mentee for a mentor situation? Went and listened to it, and that was totally how we ran our first meeting. So I was much more prepared. So I think it's all of those things together to be able to find ways to connect, to learn, to fit it. And I think, especially as an employee where you may not feel like your organization is really keyed into mentoring, it shouldn't be their responsibility, right? We should each have that responsibility in our own selves of finding mentors or finding places where we can learn and grow.
Andrew, that's a great, powerful set of comments about finding mentors. And so I want to anchor on that a little bit. Angela and I have talked about the fact that not all your mentors are going to be your supervisors. In fact, we kind of recommend that's not who you think of as your mentors. They have a mentoring role. I'm not taking anything away from supervisors, but when you're talking about, as you were talking about, growing in different directions and places, with ideas outside the company even, or outside your organization, that's not going to be your direct supervisor. So you talked about it, and I think it's worth talking a little bit more about the importance of finding those people who are not your direct supervisors, because that's such a valuable path. And they're going to bring different perspectives that you just don't have necessarily inside the organization, and certainly not from your direct supervisor, who has a role in, directing your day-to-day work, but also a mentoring thought about this is not just about how to do my current work better. It's about where am I trying to go in life and what skills am I trying to grow for whatever that path looks like. So, how do you approach that for the stuff that's not directly your current work life?
Right, that's a great question. If I think about it, I think there's probably two things that jump out of me as you were talking. The first one is we all need to recognize that there's not like two or three versions of ourselves, where there's the work me and there's the home me, or there's the community me, or there's the at home me, but we're all one person. And we got to recognize that. So the things that you learn from people at work may not necessarily be work stuff. It may be community service. It may be the way they interact with their families. It may be the way that they serve in their communities. Could be a whole bunch of things. And so I think a big part of this is recognizing that not everything needs to be about work. Not everything needs to be about life. One of my favorite ones that you guys did earlier on was find a mentor for your retirement, and I think that's huge. Had a boss who literally just went through, is in the middle of his retirement, just started off a few months ago, and shared that with him of like, hey, that's really valuable. To find somebody who you admire and how they went through that and how can they do that. And I think we need to think about that in our mentoring as well, as it doesn't need to just be work, number one. The second thought I had is I think we all need to take a breath, right? We can get so caught up in our day to day life and what we're currently doing that we don't have an opportunity to look around and see what might I be interested in? What does bring me joy? What sparks those moments of flow where you're not necessarily thinking about, everything going on with work, but that you're able to just consider what's around you, where you're interested in, what your priorities might want to be long term. I've heard it called like a waypoint in your life, right? To use the naval term,
Mhm.
and
Right.
I think we all need to take moments where we can think about where we really want to be and define that space to be able to do so, not just so caught up in everything. So I think those are kind of the two things that jumped out at me. Not sure I totally answered your question, but
No, no, you're Andrew, you're doing fine. The thing that also occurs to me in just the past couple of sentences, you talked about taking a breath and thinking about paths you hadn't considered previously. We certainly have talked about the fact that sometimes one of the values of mentors in particular, if they're not directly connected to your day-to-day work, is opening up ideas in your brain for things. Andrew, I think you'd be good at this, or have you considered these other things? These are the things that seem to light you up. Have you considered a different path for something? And so I certainly know I've had that experience, and at some recent retirement ceremonies, one of the things that came up repetitively was people standing up and saying thank you to the person who was retiring for opening their eyes to possibilities they had not previously seen. So I think that's valuable. Have you seen that kind of thing in your experience from being mentored or mentoring other folks where you see some opportunity they never even brought up?
so the one that jumps out at me really was one of my direct bosses where I'm currently working. He was about to retire, a couple steps up from me, but still within my organizational chain. And it was when I was in finance. And one of the big things that has been important to me, we talked earlier about we were a very project focused organization. You need to do a project to get promoted.
Sure.
And he recognized that that was something that I felt like was lacking of getting that supervision and leadership at our organization. And how can we make sure that we are developing our future leaders in ways that are going to continue to develop future leaders? And one of the things that he said to me that really stuck was sometimes you're a little too focused about trying to change the world, and you need to focus a little bit more about changing your world. So if
Mhm.
you want to be able to impact more people, you need to work to get promoted, and then you can impact more people, but then just work on your area. Stop trying to do so many big global things. And that was probably a mind shift I had not really wanted to have. I think, part of what we do as an agency, we do big projects, we do big things. I wanted to think big, but that was a really good opportunity to focus a lot smaller. So that's one that jumped out at me. And then through community service at the church that I'm involved with, it's really important to mentor those youth and others that are coming up. And so helping them to look at life in a different way and look at things in a way that you may not have thought of in the past. And so especially as these young men that I've been working with are growing, it's not only learning for themselves, like, hey, you need to learn to teach a lesson today because at some point in the future, you're going to do that. You need to learn to give a talk today because at some point you're going to be giving a presentation in front of somebody. And how are you going to do that? And seeing those younger people who probably thought I will never ever give a presentation in front of somebody, and 3 or 4 or 5 years later be the ones that are in front conducting meetings, having conversations that they never would have thought. I think that's been super meaningful to help them to realize, like, hey, your skills and your abilities go much further than what you thought they were, and especially at that age, you can learn so much quicker. I think for those of us that are old and have older dogs and older tricks, it's a little harder for us to make those changes. But especially those youth, they change quick.
I don't know, Andrew. I don't know what you're talking about, really.
We're all three youngins on this call, that's for sure.
Mostly just you two.
You-
I found it, this has been just such a fascinating conversation. We started out about how your first mentor, at least in the organization that you're in now, really wasn't aligned to your career, but really helped you identify more breadth of experience and getting better understanding of the business side of things. And so you really learned a lot, almost opening up your career trajectory beyond what you were originally expecting, right? Because of his influence in your life. And you talked a little bit about the formal program that your organization had, when it paused, how you still did some mentoring, and now how the mentoring program has developed and grown and really helps not just the newbies of the organization, but throughout the organization. And then you also talked a lot about how you find mentorship. And this is such a key point, Andrew, that I'm so glad you brought up. It's not just by a person, it's through the learnings. Like, if we fundamentally believe that mentoring is about growing as an individual, whether in your career or in your life, and whether that includes, being promoted or not, just growing in your career, then doing so by things like books, by things like podcasts, just learning as much as you can, that really has been a huge form of mentorship for you in your life. And you also talked a lot about needing to, to have a most effective mentoring relationship, pausing and identifying what lights you up and making sure that you have a good connection with somebody in that respect, and finding mentors through things like we did with our conference and our networks and so forth. um, I loved also how you talked about considering yourself as a whole person and recognizing that you're showing up to work as Andrew. You're also showing up to home as Andrew and your community as Andrew. And there's not three different Andrews, it's one single persona. And so considering how you want to grow as an individual from that respect. And therefore, the conversations that you might have with your work mentor may not just be about work. It could be about other things as well. And I know Bill and I have had one or two conversations in our lives that
A
have
day.
been beyond just work, right, Bill?
One or two a week, probably.
Exactly. And so I just really appreciated you bringing on these fundamental concepts about, thinking about mentoring not just in terms of career trajectory, but in terms of you as a whole person, and recognizing that even if your quote unquote mentor is not within your direct expected line of career development, that there's a lot to learn, especially when it comes to breadth of experience and how that really opened up doors for you that you perhaps didn't expect, certainly when you were a youngin doing these engineering competitions and seeing like, oh, that's what the line that I want to head down, right? What did
Absolutely.
I miss from our conversation?
I think the only I just to hit on it because I think it is so important is that we can find mentoring everywhere and recognize that and use it.
Yeah, yeah. Bill, how about from you?
Well, so the only thing that I want nuance that I don't think you called out specifically when you did a great summary, Angela, was when you had your first mentoring experience and there was some sort of a formalized mentoring program. You and your mentor said, "Well, you know what? We're going to make this program worked for us, and we're going to sort of change it up a little bit, which I think is a very simple but powerful statement to people who are part of some sort of formalized mentoring program. If the way it was set up isn't working perfectly, work together and figure out how to make it work for the two of you. You sort of did it as an, oh, by the way. I think that's a very strong statement. And so I just didn't want to let it pass. So before we wrap up, first off, Andrew, I certainly want to thank you very much for taking the time. This was a fascinating discussion, and I think a lot of powerful ideas. And so I'm going to sort of put you on the spot and say, listen, I'll bet there's other folks who would love to talk to you about your experience and how they might apply that in their lives. Are you willing to share, how could people get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So totally available. Would love to be able to participate in any way, shape, or form to help other people develop. Can definitely find me at LinkedIn, Andrew Hall there. And I'm sure I can share my contact information as well with Angela and Bill. And if anybody reaches out to you, we can pass that along.
Sure. We'll be happy to put the contact information in the show notes.
Thank you.
Okay, well then with that, thank you for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.